He studied hydraulics in Rome, not too well, worked valet in Amsterdam, visited Paris, even thought of becoming a monk. But when the French invaded Rome in the late 1700s, he got drafted, ran off, moved abroad, performed at a famous London circus, amazed crowds with his strength. He was nearly 6'6", broad shoulders, once held 12 people at once. But still, no glory, no money. He was a failure. This Italian guy from a poor family kept chasing his place in the world, moving from city to city across Europe, but never found steady pay or real respect. But during all that wandering, he did find the one. Sarah Bane, the woman who stuck with him for life. This is the story of Giovanni Belzoni, a poor Italian dreamer. An incredible journey was waiting for him. With him, we'll discover how Ramesses II carved his legacy in stone, and whether a rock-cut temple can be moved. We'll follow Ra into the afterlife and uncover the secrets of the Book of the Dead. This is History Adventures. So, let's go face Osiris and weigh our hearts. During one of his travels, while staying on the island of Malta, Belzoni crossed paths with an Egyptian sea captain, a tobacco merchant who was searching for skilled engineers. They were needed by Egypt's ambitious and cunning leader, Muhammad Ali, a man on a mission to reshape and modernize his country. For Egypt, irrigation was everything, since the Nile, just like tens of thousands of years ago, still meant life itself to its people. Unemployed, but full of fire, Giovanni spoke with passion and a bit of desperation about his great skills in hydraulics. Then came the call to Egypt, a golden chance to finally prove himself, earn respect, make a name, and change his life for good. Belzoni arrived, built his hydraulic machine, clearly explained how it worked, even entertained the curious locals with electric tricks. But on the most important day, during a public demonstration for officials and spectators, the device broke down. Belzoni was dismissed. No job, no money, stuck in a foreign land with strange customs and a culture that he didn't know. He could have given up. This was one of those moments when one door shuts, another one swings wide open. In Egypt, he met a familiar name, the explorer who discovered Petra, Johann Ludwig Burckhardt. We've got a whole episode about his wild adventures. Go check it out. So, after hearing about his engineering skills, Burckhardt told the Italian, Belzoni, about an incredible statue of Ramesses II he'd found in Luxor, up in Upper Egypt. But it was far too heavy to move to Cairo. Johann made the offer to Belzoni, and of course he said yes. The work was funded by His Majesty's brand new Consul General, Henry Salt. You've got to understand the full context here. The 19th century was Egypt's version of a gold rush. Not just serious scholars, but merchants and all kinds of treasure hunters, all hoping to strike it rich by digging up ancient artifacts and selling them to eager European collectors and prestigious museums. There was a real race going on between longtime rivals, England and France. I've told you before how both wanted to outdo each other and grab as many treasures as they could, like in our episodes on Babylon or Assyria. Well now, Giovanni Belzoni himself joined that race too. Belzoni had a serious rival in Egypt, Bernardino Drovetti, not a traveler or an adventurer, but a French officer and close ally of Muhammad Ali, and one of the biggest antiquities collectors of his time. The treasures he shipped out of Egypt now form the core of the Egyptian collections in museums in Turin, Paris, and Berlin. So, the statue Belzoni was after was one of those treasures the French had dreamed of. In fact, Napoleon's soldiers had already tried to take it during his campaign in Egypt, but they couldn't haul it out. And instead of a bust, they ended up with something else, an artifact that became the key to unlocking all of ancient Egypt. That's when they discovered the Rosetta Stone, which I've told you about before. And so now, standing before that massive statue, not Napoleon's troops, but one puzzled circus man dreaming of turning his life around. The statue was 2 meters wide, nearly 3 meters long, and weighed just over 7 tons. The eyes of Egypt's legendary ruler looked slightly downward and were a bit larger than usual. Because of a mistake, it's called the Young Memnon, but it's actually a sculpture of Ramesses II. Things weren't going Belzoni's way. He couldn't get workers, kept getting turned down for help, and worst of all, the Nile's flood season was coming. And soon the water would reach Ramesses' temple, where our Italian was working. It was starting to feel pretty hopeless. In every episode about the Middle East, I've got to tell you about one magical word, bakshish. It's the key to how European archaeologists, local workers, and rulers got things done. Technically, it means a donation, but let's be real. it was a bribe. And yeah, a little bakshish from Belzoni, plus of course just a touch of pressure, helped speed things right along. He built wooden frames, set them on rollers, gathered a crew, and slowly, with hundreds of men, inch by inch, they began moving the statue toward the river. Ramesses II was leaving his homeland, getting closer and closer to England. Today, he stands in the British Museum. But this was just the beginning of Giovanni Belzoni's adventures. The legacy of Ramesses the Great had captured the heart of our would-be archaeologist. Remembering his friend Burckhardt's tales of giant statues seemingly fused with the cliffs, he set off to find that mysterious and majestic place. With his wife, he journeyed up the Nile, deep into Africa. Ramesses II is remembered as a powerful ruler, one who expanded Egypt's borders and built breathtaking new temples. He rose to the throne after the death of his father, Seti I. But few people noticed that it was actually Seti I who reclaimed Egypt's lost lands, laid the foundation for its renewed prosperity, and ended the power struggles among the nobility, a chaos that had begun after the death of Akhenaten, the father of Tutankhamun. I talked about that in our episode on Tutankhamun. Back then, in the 19th century, no one knew where Seti was buried. His tomb had long been lost. But Belzoni kept on wandering, and then, right from his boat, he saw exactly what Burckhardt had described, the rock-cut temple of Abu Simbel. Lonely, the very top of the structure was visible. The rest was buried in sand, and he couldn't get inside. It took him a few more years to return, but when he did, with the help of local workers, they cleared the entrance to this breathtaking sanctuary. 4 massive 20-meter-tall statues of a seated Ramesses II guard the front. Beneath the giant pharaohs sit delicate sculpted figures of his family, his mother, his queen Nefertari, and their children, forever carved into the stone. In 1257 BCE, 2 temples were carved into the rock here, the great and the small. One honored Pharaoh Ramesses II's victory over the Hittites. The other was dedicated to his beloved wife, Nefertari. It was an architectural marvel. Each morning, the rising sun would cast its rays directly onto the entrance, gently illuminating the sanctuary within. And just twice a year, sunlight reached all the way inside, illuminating the statues of the pharaoh and the gods in the very last chamber. Inside the temple was a grand hall lined with columns, 8 colossal statues of the pharaoh as Osiris, standing face to face in 2 rows. The square pillars and high ceilings were richly decorated with a series of vivid, colorful reliefs showing the pharaoh in the presence of powerful gods and goddesses, Horus, Isis, Amun-Ra, Ptah, and many others. Even the sphinxes that lined the sacred avenues were sculpted with facial features made to resemble the great ruler himself. The small temple at Abu Simbel is dedicated to the goddess Hathor. It's simpler than the great temple, with a rock-cut hall of columns and a sanctuary holding 3 niches. The front is adorned with 6 statues. Between the statues of the pharaoh stands one of his beloved wife, Nefertari. Her name means the one for whom the sun shines. On one of the columns, an inscription reads, Ramesses, strong in truth, beloved of Amun, made this divine dwelling for his cherished wife Nefertari. By the way, in the 1960s, the temple was at risk of being flooded. That's when scientists from 50 countries joined forces worldwide to save Abu Simbel. The temple was dismantled into just over 1,000 blocks, each one numbered, then reassembled on higher ground, about 200 meters up from the river. Scientists were amazed at how precisely the ancient Egyptians had aligned these massive structures. The facades of the great and small temples were carefully aligned with natural cracks in the rock, so the solid mountain stone could help support the massive statues. The builders even took into account the natural properties of the land. The sandstone layers were bonded with iron oxide, which helped preserve them over time. That oxide gave the stone its colors. Pretty incredible when you think about it, right? And now, Belzoni's journey continues, and this next part is the most exciting and unexpected yet. Belzoni headed to the Valley of the Kings. He ordered his team to search the area around the tomb of Ramesses I. The day before, a heavy rain had fallen, and he noticed something strange. The water was mysteriously draining into some kind of hollow space. The workers kept saying, No, there's absolutely nothing there. But our experienced archaeologist made them dig that one spot for 2 days. By Friday evening, the edge of a cut appeared in the rock. By Saturday at noon, they uncovered an entrance 5.5 meters below the surface. It was completely sealed. They cleared a small opening, picked the shortest, skinniest worker they had, and sent him in to scout it out. Soon he came back, wide-eyed, describing a magnificent tomb, its walls completely covered in vivid, colorful reliefs. Yes, you heard that right. Belzoni had discovered the most elegant, most beautiful tomb in the entire Valley of the Kings, the tomb of Seti I, father of Ramesses. Burial rituals and the ceremonies around death, they're a cultural constant. Every civilization has them. The ancient Egyptians had complex and often deeply contradictory beliefs about the afterlife. Diodorus of Sicily once wrote, "They call the homes of the living inns because people stay there only briefly. But tombs they call eternal dwellings, for that's where they settle forever." That's why they cared little about decorating their modest homes, but spared no effort making their tombs truly magnificent. Seti's tomb was carved deep into the rock. It holds 6 staircases, 4 columned halls, and 16 separate rooms, including a false burial chamber designed to fool looters, and the real one carefully hidden beyond. It's considered the finest masterpiece of funerary architecture. The tomb stretches 137 meters, with every wall covered in vivid scenes of the afterlife. The tomb of Seti I reveals the rich ancient Egyptian beliefs, their funerary rituals, religious views, and mythological vision of the afterlife. Take Thutmose III and Amenhotep II, who ruled before Seti. Their tombs display simple, almost schematic drawings. Ramesses I features figures shown in motion. But here, in Seti's tomb, everything is on a whole other level of artistry and detail. For the very first time, a tradition was broken, where only the most important chambers were ever decorated. This grand tomb is covered in painted reliefs from the entrance all the way to the burial chamber. The vivid scenes come from funerary texts like the Book of Gates and the Book of the Dead. The Egyptian Book of the Dead was very much alive. It evolved over centuries, and there's no single official version of it. As the beliefs of the ancient Egyptians gradually shifted, so did the Book of the Dead, changing alongside their view of the afterlife. The Book of the Dead is just the popular name. Its original title was Coming Forth by Day. It's a collection of funerary prayers, sayings, spells, incantations, rituals, and more. The text is divided into chapters, and just one version of it could include as many as 200 spells. For the Egyptians, death wasn't the end. It was merely a transition to the next phase of existence. But to reach it, the soul had to face incredible and daunting challenges. The heart of the text was to help the dead survive the perils of the afterlife, pass the final judgment, and be reborn aboard the sun god Ra's boat, to live forever in peace with loved ones in the fields of Yaru, their version of paradise. It's a book about defeating death. To the ancient Egyptians, the universe was made up of 5 distinct parts: the sky, the earth, water, the mountains, and the duat, the mysterious realm of the dead. They believed every person had not just one, but several souls that lived on after death and could still connect with the living. At death, the soul split into 2 parts: the Ba, a moving life force, and the Ka, the person's unique essence. This essence had to journey through the afterlife to reach paradise. If successful, the soul reunited and lived forever. If not, that was the end. That's why rituals had to be precise. Burial was especially important. While the soul traveled, the body had to remain intact. That's why Egyptians practiced mummification, which I covered in our episode on Tutankhamun. The Egyptian state was a place where absolutely everything was deeply interconnected. The link between the world of the gods and the world of people ran directly through the pharaoh, who was both divine and human. The well-being of the land and its people depended entirely on him. After death, the pharaoh entered the realm of the dead. Egyptians believed that when a pharaoh died, he transformed into a god, one with the power to grant others the path to eternal afterlife. The afterlife, the duat, was closely linked to our world. It held dark caves, fiery lakes where sinners burned, but also fields of peace and eternal bliss. Each night as the sun set, the sun god Ra entered the duat on his celestial boat. Over 12 long hours, he passed through 12 gates, one for each hour, battling fierce evil forces. He conquered them all, reached the radiant fields of paradise, and rose again with the dawn sun. After death, the pharaoh was destined to join Ra on this perilous 12-hour journey. The journey wasn't exactly easy, so you needed a guide. That's where the Book of the Dead came in. Its instructions were written on sarcophagus walls, linen wrappings, and papyrus scrolls, often placed right in the hand of the deceased. Kind of like hearing, "In 200 meters, turn right," just like on a modern GPS. At first, this sacred knowledge was reserved only for the pharaoh. But over time, anyone with enough money could order their own guide to the afterlife. These guides were very expensive, though you could save some money by carefully selecting which chapters to include and which to skip. Kind of like a condensed version, but the pharaoh's rebirth was sacred and crucial. That's why every wall in Seti's tomb is richly painted. He had to know the names of every guardian and monster, and recite each spell perfectly to unlock the gates to the underworld. The reliefs in Seti's tomb focus on two main themes: the king's ritual offerings before the gods, and illustrated scenes from the so-called books of the afterlife. One of the most striking is the mystical opening of the mouth ritual. A priest would touch the mouth of the deceased with sacred tools while chanting spells, so that in the afterlife, the dead pharaoh could walk, breathe, and eat again. Among the many gods here, Ra is clearly the dominant figure. Scenes of his journey fill the first two corridors of the tomb. First, the soul separates from the body and joins Ra, shown as a falcon-headed deity, heading to the edge of the world, to one of the four great mountains holding up the sky. And there, at the mountain's base, the soul boards a boat and enters the night, where the underworld river, the Styx, begins to flow. Ra guides the boat through dark waters where the giant serpent Apophis, the Egyptian version of Satan, lies in wait. These waters swarm with monsters, all trying to devour the soul. Only powerful spells can stop them, and that's where the guidebook comes in. In the end, the pharaoh's soul reaches the edge of the shadow realm, the Duat. There are more obstacles ahead, monsters you can only defeat with spells, from the Book of the Dead. Then the soul faces judgment before Osiris. He's not alone. 42 gods are there, and the dead must confess, "I didn't sin, I wasn't greedy, didn't lie, steal, gossip, cheat, or nitpick." Yep, even nitpicking was considered a sin. Say, your coffee's not hot enough, and next thing you know, you're awkwardly standing there, explaining yourself to the gods. The ancient Egyptian always had a chance to repent and be forgiven, something deeply important on a psychological level. The judges beside Osiris represented truth and justice. Nearby stood the scales, symbols of balance and honesty. On them lay the heart, believed to be the center of a person's thoughts, will, and spirit. It held both virtues and sins. The heart was the symbol of conscience itself. This was the climax, the moment when the soul stood face to face with the supreme God. And here the truth was revealed, who the person really was. On one side of the scale lay the heart. On the other, the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth. The heart had to weigh the same as the feather. If it did, the soul entered paradise. If not, it was devoured by a terrifying beast. Seti's tomb shows lost souls, drowning or burning upside down, as the solar boat sails through the night, surrounded by serpents and monsters. One of the central themes is the meeting of Ra and Osiris in the afterlife, where they merge into one supreme divine being. By the way, you've probably heard that when a pharaoh died, dozens of courtiers and servants were put to death with him. But that only happened in the earliest royal burials. Later on, human sacrifices were replaced by ushabti, little figurines. So yeah, art literally saved lives. In the afterlife, these figures served the ruler. About 100 of them were found in Seti's tomb. A similar idea, replacing real servants with symbolic statues, was used to create the famous terracotta army, found in the tomb of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. We talked about that in our episode on ancient China. Belzoni, enchanted by the beauty of the reliefs, began copying them and making wax impressions. But in the process, he damaged some of the artwork. He must have felt deeply disappointed when he reached the burial chamber. All he found was a single sarcophagus. It was open and empty. No mummy, no treasure. The tomb had clearly been looted long ago. Seti's long-lost royal mummy was finally found 60 years later in another hidden tomb, buried among several others. Belzoni's return to Europe in 1820 was nothing short of a triumph. He was received with honors at royal and imperial courts throughout Europe, including a formal welcome in St. Petersburg from Alexander I himself. He published his travel memoirs in 3 languages, sharing his discoveries with a fascinated public. He also organized the very first solo exhibition of Egyptian antiquities, renting out the Grand Egyptian Hall in London, which had been built back in 1812. The exhibition drew enormous crowds and was a critical success, even if it wasn't quite as profitable as Belzoni had hoped. But Giovanni's journey was far from over. Belzoni set out for the fabled city of Timbuktu, hoping to find the source of the Niger River, a place long tied to legendary wealth. Like Burckhardt before him, he never returned. He died of dysentery at just 45, but his legacy helped shape the very foundations of Egyptology. The doctrine of resurrection after judgment was widely embraced in ancient Egypt, later adopted by many religions that followed. When studying their culture, it often feels like their lives revolved around death. The endless burial rituals, tombs, and pyramids all make one thing clear: death wasn't the end. It was the center of everything. But they also knew you can't obsess over death. The ancient Egyptians were joyful and full of love. In the end, life was what mattered most, the one to be honored.